The silver gleam of Dr. Rachel Rivers' surgical instruments caught the amber glow of lantern light as her steady hands worked against time and fate. Montana Territory, 1876, a place where medicine was as scarce as rain in August, and a woman doctor was rarer still. The pounding at her clinic door in the small town of Pinon, Montana, had come just as she was preparing for a night's rest after delivering twins at the McCaffrey homestead. "Doctor, please, my father's dying." The voice belonged to a man she'd seen around town, but never properly met Ryder Daniels, son of old Victor Daniels, whose ranch sprawled across the eastern valley. Rachel had barely grabbed her medical bag before being whisked away on the fastest horse she'd ever ridden, clinging to the waist of a man whose father's life hung in the balance. The night air sliced at her face as they thundered through the darkness, the stars overhead bearing silent witness to their desperate journey. That was 3 days ago. Now, as Victor Daniels' fever finally broke, Rachel allowed herself to release the breath she felt she'd been holding since the moment she'd first seen the infected bullet wound festering in the old rancher's side. "He's going to live," she announced softly, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. She turned to find Ryder Daniels slumped in a chair by the door, his broad shoulders curved in exhaustion, his hat resting on his knee. His eyes, the color of Montana sky, lifted to meet hers. "You saved him," he said, his voice rough with emotion, when everyone else said it couldn't be done. Rachel shook her head. "Your father's strong, stubborn too." She began packing her instruments, her movements precise despite her fatigue. "The bullet fragments are all removed, the infection's retreating. Keep the wound clean, change the dressing twice daily. I'll return tomorrow to check. I don't know how to thank you." Ryder stood, all 6 feet of him unfolding from the chair. His face, tanned and weathered from years under the western sun, held something more than gratitude. "There's no need for thanks, Mr. Daniels. It's my job." Rachel secured her medical bag, suddenly aware of her rumpled appearance and the loose strands of auburn hair that had escaped her usually tidy bun. "Ryder," he corrected, "and there's every need." He moved closer, and in the lamplight she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of beard on his strong jaw. "You've been here for 3 days straight, barely eating, barely sleeping. As I said, would you join us for supper tomorrow?" The question came abruptly, cutting through her practiced professional distance. Once pause rested some. "Our housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, makes a fine stew and—" He hesitated, a hint of color rising beneath his tan. "I'd like the chance to properly express my gratitude." Rachel studied him, this tall cowboy with work-hardened hands and eyes that held both strength and something unexpectedly gentle. She'd been in Pinon for over a year now, establishing her practice amid skepticism and occasional outright hostility. A woman doctor was still a novelty in these parts, viewed with suspicion by many. She'd learned to keep to herself, focusing on her work rather than social niceties. "That's very kind, but I have patients to see," she replied, reaching for her shawl. "The day after, then." His persistence surprised her. "Or the day after that, whenever you can spare the time." A small smile tugged at her lips despite her exhaustion. "You're as stubborn as your father, Mr. Daniels." "Ryder," he reminded her again, returning her smile with one that transformed his face, softening the hard planes and angles. "And yes, madam, Daniel's men are known for their determination." He hesitated, then added quietly, "especially when something matters." Their eyes held for a moment too long to be casual, and Rachel felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Very well," she conceded. "Tomorrow evening, but only to check on my patient." "Of course," he agreed, though his smile suggested he knew he'd won a small victory. I'll send the wagon for you at 6. As promised, Ryder's ranch hand arrived the following evening with a wagon to transport Rachel to the Daniels ranch. The sprawling property came into view as they crested a hill, a large main house with a wide porch, flanked by a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and horses grazed in a corral near the house. Rachel smoothed her best dress, a modest navy blue affair with white piping at the collar and cuffs. It was one of the few concessions to femininity in her wardrobe, which consisted mainly of practical clothing suited to her profession. She'd even pinned her hair differently, allowing soft curls to frame her face. The moment she'd caught herself making these extra efforts, she'd almost changed back into her usual attire. But something, curiosity perhaps, or something less easily named, had stopped her. Mrs. Abernathy, a stout woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, greeted her at the door. "Dr. Rivers, we've heard nothing but your praises these past days. Come in, come in. The old bear's already demanding to be let out of bed." "That's a good sign," Rachel replied, following her inside. The house was surprisingly well appointed for a ranch so far from town. Solid furniture, woven rugs, even a piano in the corner of the main room. "Though he shouldn't be up just yet." "Try telling him that," Mrs. Abernathy chuckled, leading her upstairs. Victor Daniels was indeed attempting to sit up when Rachel entered his room, with Ryder trying to persuade him to lie back down. Both men turned at her entrance, and Rachel noticed how Ryder's eyes widened slightly before he tipped his head in greeting. "Evening, Dr. Rivers." "Mr. Daniels," she nodded to him, then turned her attention to her patient. "And Mr. Daniels Sr., I see you're feeling stronger." "Strong enough to get out of this blasted bed," the older man grumbled, though there was a twinkle in his eye. He was a bear of a man with a shock of white hair and the same blue eyes as his son. "My boy here thinks I'm made of china." "Your boy is right," Rachel said firmly, setting down her medical bag. "That wound needs time to heal properly. Another week of bed rest at minimum." Victor scowled. "A week? I've got a ranch to run." "You've got a son and capable hands to run it while you recover," Rachel countered, beginning her examination. "Unless you'd prefer to tear those stitches and start the whole process over." Ryder suppressed a smile as his father muttered under his breath, but submitted to her examination. Rachel worked efficiently, checking the wound, his temperature, and his heart. "The infection's clearing nicely," she pronounced. "But you lost a significant amount of blood, and your body needs time to replenish it. Plenty of iron-rich foods, liver, spinach, beef, and rest, Mr. Daniels. I cannot emphasize that enough." "Victor," the old man corrected. "If you're going to order me around like a cavalry sergeant, you might as well use my Christian name." Rachel's lips quirked. "Very well, Victor. Rest, fluids, and proper nutrition, doctor's orders." "Yes, madam," he sighed dramatically. "Though I still say a man shouldn't be confined to bed when there's work to be done." "The work will wait, Pa," Ryder interjected. "Dr. Rivers didn't spend 3 days saving your ornery hide just so you could undo all her hard work." Something in his tone made Rachel glance up. The respect in his voice wasn't just for her medical skills, she realized. There was admiration there too, and something warmer that made her cheeks flush slightly. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the door. "Supper's ready when you are. I've set a tray for Mr. Daniels in here." "Thank you," Ryder said. "We'll be down directly." He turned to Rachel. "Unless you need more time with your patient." "No, he's progressing well," she replied, closing her bag. "Though I suspect keeping him in bed will be your greatest challenge." "Not the first time I've had to wrangle something stubborn," Ryder said with a wink at his father that made the older man snort. Downstairs, the dining table was set with fine china and silver that must have come west with the family. A savory aroma filled the air, making Rachel realize how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. "Mrs. Abernathy's been with us since I was knee-high to a grasshopper," Ryder explained as he held Rachel's chair. "Came west with us from Pennsylvania after my mother passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," Rachel said softly. "It was a long time ago. I was just a boy of 8. He took his seat across from her. Pa never remarried, though plenty tried to catch his eye over the years. Mrs. Abernathy served a hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread and butter, followed by apple pie still warm from the oven. The food was delicious, and the company unexpectedly pleasant. Ryder asked thoughtful questions about her training and practice, genuinely interested in her answers. "It couldn't have been easy," he observed, "becoming a doctor as a woman." Rachel paused, considering how much to share. "No," she admitted finally. "It wasn't. Many doors were closed to me. Those that opened often did so reluctantly." "What made you choose medicine?" His eyes were intent on her face, truly listening. "My father was a doctor in Boston," she explained. "I assisted him from the time I was old enough to read labels on medicine bottles. After he died, I was determined to continue his work. My mother supported my decision, though many of our acquaintances were scandalized." "And what brought you all the way to Pinyon, Montana?" Ryder asked, refilling her water glass. Rachel's expression tightened slightly. "There was resistance to my practice in the East. A female physician was considered acceptable for treating women and children, but not much else. I wanted to practice real medicine, not be limited by arbitrary restrictions. The West seemed to offer that opportunity." "Must have taken considerable courage," Ryder remarked, his admiration evident. "Leaving everything familiar behind, or foolhardiness," Rachel smiled slightly. "At least that's what my former fiancé called it." Ryder's eyebrows rose. "Former." He couldn't understand why being a doctor's wife wasn't sufficient for me, why I needed to be a doctor myself. She looked down at her plate. "In the end, he presented me with a choice, him or medicine. It wasn't as difficult a decision as he expected it to be." "His loss," Ryder said simply, and the conviction in his voice made her look up in surprise. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Mrs. Abernathy broke the moment by bringing coffee. As they sipped the strong brew, Ryder told Rachel about the ranch, 5,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, and 20 horses, including the prize-winning quarter horses he bred and trained himself. "It was just wilderness when Pa first staked his claim," he explained. 23 years of hard work built what you see today. He came west after my mother died, said he needed sky big enough to breathe under." "And you?" Rachel asked. "Did you ever consider a different life?" Ryder considered the question thoughtfully. "I went to school in Denver for a spell. Pa thought I should have more education than he had, but this land—" He glanced out the window at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "It gets in your blood. I couldn't imagine being anywhere else." As the evening wound down, Rachel reluctantly acknowledged it was time to return to town. Ryder insisted on driving her himself rather than sending a hand. "I need to pick up supplies anyway," he explained, helping her into the wagon. "And I'd like to make sure you get home safely." The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Montana sky. The air held the crispness of early fall, and Rachel drew her shawl closer around her shoulders. "Cold?" Ryder asked immediately. "A little," she admitted. Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his coat and placed it around her shoulders. The warmth of his body lingered in the fabric, along with a scent that was uniquely his: leather, pine, and something indefinably masculine. Rachel found herself drawing it closer, though she protested weakly. Then you'll be cold. I'm used to it, he smiled. Montana winters toughen a man's hide. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. "Thank you," Ryder said suddenly, his voice low in the darkness. "Not just for saving Pa's life, though I'll be forever grateful for that, but for coming to Pinyon. Most doctors wouldn't bother with a town this size, especially not one with your training." "I go where I'm needed," Rachel replied simply. "Still." He glanced at her, his profile strong in the moonlight. "You're a blessing to this community, whether they all recognize it yet or not." The compliment warmed her more than his coat had. In Boston, her accomplishments had always been minimized, her skills questioned. Here was a man who saw her value without qualification. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a great deal." When they reached her small house at the edge of town, Ryder jumped down to help her from the wagon. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary before he stepped back. "I'll bring the wagon by tomorrow afternoon," he said, "so you can check on Pa again." "That would be fine," Rachel agreed, reluctantly slipping off his coat and returning it. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending an unexpected jolt of awareness through her. "Good night, Dr. Rivers," he said, his voice carrying a smile even in the darkness. "Rachel," she corrected impulsively. "If I'm to call your father Victor." His smile widened, visible even in the dim light. "Good night, Rachel. Sleep well." As promised, Ryder returned the next day and the day after that. What began as medical visits gradually evolved into something more. Rachel found herself looking forward to the journey to the Daniels ranch, to the meals shared around the table, to Victor's gruff but increasingly affectionate complaints, to Mrs. Abernathy's motherly fussing, and most of all, to Ryder's thoughtful conversation and attentive presence. 2 weeks after Victor's injury, Rachel pronounced him well enough to leave his bed for short periods. The old rancher celebrated by insisting on dining at the table for supper, and afterward suggested that Ryder show Rachel the new foal born just days earlier. "Prettiest little filly you ever saw," Victor declared, spitting image of her mama, who was the finest quarter horse in 3 territories. The evening air was cool as Ryder led Rachel to the barn, a lantern swinging from his hand. Inside, the warm smell of hay and horses greeted them. He guided her to a stall where a chestnut mare stood protectively beside a leggy foal with a white blaze down its face. "She's beautiful," Rachel breathed, watching as the foal nursed. "She is," Ryder agreed, though when Rachel glanced up, she found him looking not at the horses but at her. The lantern light caught the gold flecks in his blue eyes, and Rachel felt her pulse quicken. "Your father seems much improved," she said, returning her attention to the horses. "Thanks to you." Ryder set the lantern on a hook and leaned against the stall door beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "He's talking about riding out to check the north pasture next week." "Not yet," Rachel said firmly. "Light duty's only for another 2 weeks. That wound was deep, and at his age I'll keep him reined in," Ryder promised. "Though it won't be easy. He's not used to being idle." "Stubbornness must run in the family," Rachel observed with a small smile, "along with recognizing what's valuable when we find it." His voice had softened, and when she looked up, the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Rachel," a commotion from outside interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. Shouts and the sound of galloping hooves sent Ryder running for the barn door, Rachel close behind him. A ranch hand was dismounting from a lathered horse, calling for Ryder. "Rustlers hit the West Range," he reported breathlessly. "Made off with at least 20 head. Jenkins is tracking them, but he sent me back for reinforcements." Ryder's expression hardened. "Get Simmons and Farley." Tell them to bring rifles. I'll saddle up and meet you at the main gate in 5 minutes." The hand nodded and sprinted toward the bunkhouse. Ryder turned to Rachel, conflict clear on his face. "I need to go," he said, already moving toward the tack room. "Of course," she nodded. "I should return to town anyway. My morning appointments, no." His response was immediate. "It's too late to travel alone, and I need every hand for this. Stay here tonight. Mrs. Abernathy will make up a room for you." The authority in his voice might have bristled her normally, but the concern underlying it softened her response. "All right," she agreed. "But be careful, Ryder." He paused in his preparations, a saddle in his arms, and looked at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "I will," he promised. "I've got something important to come back for." Before she could respond, he was striding toward the corral where his horse waited. Minutes later, he and 3 ranch hands rode out into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the night. Mrs. Abernathy clucked worriedly when Rachel explained what had happened, but efficiently prepared a guest room. "Those thieving scoundrels," she muttered. "Getting bolder every season. But don't you fret, Dr. Rivers. Our boys know what they're doing." Despite the housekeeper's reassurances, Rachel found sleep elusive. She lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the wind outside and thinking of Ryder facing unknown dangers in the dark. What had he been about to say in the barn before they were interrupted? The question circled in her mind as she finally drifted off near dawn. She woke to the sound of horses in the yard and rushed to the window to see Ryder and his men returning, leading the recovered cattle. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by embarrassment at the intensity of her reaction. How had this man come to matter so much to her in such a short time? By the time she dressed and went downstairs, the men were settling the cattle back in their pasture. Mrs. Abernathy was preparing a hearty breakfast, and Victor was seated at the table despite the early hour, eager for news. Caught them just before they crossed Miller's Creek. One of the hands was explaining as Rachel entered. "Put up a fight, but Ryder winged one of them and they scattered like quail." "Any of our boys hurt?" Victor demanded. "No, sir. Jenkins took a graze across the arm, but the doc here could fix that with her eyes closed." All eyes turned to Rachel, and she found herself searching for Ryder among them. He entered at that moment, removing his hat as he stepped through the door. There was dust on his clothes and weariness in his face, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "You're still here," he said, as if reassuring himself. "Of course," she replied. "You told me to stay." Something flickered in his expression, satisfaction, perhaps, or pleasure at her compliance. "Jenkins could use your attention when you have a moment, nothing serious." Rachel nodded, already reaching for her medical bag. "I'll see to him now." The wound was indeed minor, a shallow furrow across the upper arm that required cleaning and bandaging, but no stitches. By the time she finished, breakfast was on the table and the mood was celebratory. All the cattle had been recovered, and though the rustlers had escaped, they'd left behind enough evidence for the sheriff to pursue them. "You should ride into town and report this," Victor told Ryder. "Take the doctor back while you're at it. She's got patients waiting, I expect." "I do," Rachel acknowledged, though she felt a curious reluctance to leave. "And I should check on Mrs. Hollister, her baby's due any day now." "I'll have the wagon ready in half an hour," Ryder promised. As Rachel gathered her things, she felt a strange sense of displacement. In just a few weeks, this ranch had begun to feel familiar, even welcoming. The thought of returning to her solitary routine in town left her oddly bereft. The drive back was quieter than usual, both of them tired from the disrupted night. But as they approached Pinyon, Ryder broke the silence. "I need to ask you something, Rachel." Her heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. "Yes." The harvest dance is next Saturday." He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. "Would you consider attending with me?" The harvest dance was Pignon's biggest social event of the season. Everyone would be there, which meant everyone would see them together, would draw conclusions about their relationship. It was a public declaration of interest, impossible to misinterpret. She hesitated, surprised by the invitation. "I don't usually attend such gatherings." "Neither do I," he admitted with a small smile, "but I'd make an exception for the right company." Rachel studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the determination in the set of his mouth. In Boston, she'd guarded her independence fiercely, knowing that marriage would almost certainly mean the end of her medical practice. But here in the West, the rules were different, and Ryder had shown nothing but respect for her work. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I'd like that." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll pick you up at 7, he said, and his voice held a promise that stirred something deep within her. The week that followed was filled with anticipation. Rachel found herself rifling through her limited wardrobe, wishing for something more festive than her usual practical attire. When a package arrived from the mercantile with a length of emerald green silk and a note from Mrs. Abernathy offering to help fashion it into a dress, tears sprang unexpectedly to her eyes. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool. Rachel stood before her small mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The green dress complemented her auburn hair and brought out the hazel of her eyes. Mrs. Abernathy had styled her hair in an elegant arrangement that softened her features while maintaining her dignity as a professional woman. The knock at her door came precisely at 7. Ryder stood on her porch in a black suit, his hair neatly combed, his hat in his hands. For a moment he simply stared at her, something akin to awe in his expression. "You look beautiful," he said finally, the words coming out soft and reverent. Rachel felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fine fabric of his suit. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty, lanterns casting a warm glow over the assembled townspeople. A small band played in the corner, and couples were already dancing. Conversations paused as they entered, heads turning to observe the unexpected pair, the woman doctor and the rancher's son. Rachel felt a moment of self-consciousness under the scrutiny, but Ryder's hand settled reassuringly at the small of her back. "Ignore them," he murmured close to her ear. "They're just jealous. I've got the prettiest woman in Montana on my arm." The evening passed in a blur of dancing, conversation, and laughter. Rachel found herself relaxing as the initial stares gave way to genuine acceptance. Wives of men she'd treated came to chat, and several mothers introduced their children, thanking her for past care. During a pause between dances, while Ryder fetched them punch, Mayor Collins approached her with his wife. "Dr. Rivers," he greeted her warmly. "Delightful to see you joining in the festivities. You've become quite an asset to our community." "Thank you, Mayor," Rachel replied, surprised by the compliment from a man who'd initially been skeptical of her abilities. "Indeed," Mrs. Collins added. "When little Timothy came down with that terrible fever last month, I don't know what we would have done without you." Dr. Miller never would have made it from Helena in time. Ryder returned, handing Rachel a cup of punch and greeting the mayor with a nod. "Evening, sir, Mrs. Collins." "Young Daniels," the mayor acknowledged. "Your father recovering well, I trust?" "Yes, sir, thanks to Dr. Rivers here." "So I've heard," Mayor Collins smiled. "You know, Doctor, when you first arrived in Pignon, many of us wondered if a woman physician could handle the rigors of frontier medicine. I believe you've answered that question decisively." High praise indeed, coming from you, Mayor, Rachel responded, aware of Ryder's proud gaze on her. As the evening wound down, Ryder suggested they step outside for some fresh air. The night was clear, stars brilliant against the velvet blackness of the Montana sky. They walked a little way from the hall, the music fading behind them. Was it very difficult? Ryder asked suddenly. Coming here, starting over, facing all that doubt. Rachel considered the question seriously. Yes, she admitted. There were nights I questioned my decision, wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. The loneliness was challenging. Ryder stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features were cast in silver and shadow, his eyes intense as they searched hers. And now. She smiled softly. Now I know I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. He took her hands in his touch gentle yet sure. Rachel, I've never met anyone like you. Your strength, your compassion, your determination, they humble me. These past weeks, getting to know you, they've changed something in me. Rachel's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Ryder, let me finish, he said softly. I know it's soon. I know you value your independence, your practice. I would never ask you to give that up. But I need you to know that I'm falling in love with you, Rachel Rivers. Deeply, completely in love. The words hung in the night air between them, honest and vulnerable and brave. Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she'd kept carefully controlled for so long. I've spent my entire adult life proving I don't need anyone, she whispered. Building walls to protect my heart, my dreams. And then you come along with your kindness and your respect and She gestured helplessly. You're everything, and those walls just seem to crumble. Is that a bad thing? He asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Terrifying, she admitted with a small, shaky laugh. But no, not bad. She looked up at him, allowing herself to be truly vulnerable. I think I'm falling in love with you too, Ryder Daniels. The joy that transformed his face was breathtaking. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the contact sending a cascade of sensation through her body. Rachel found herself responding with a passion that surprised her, her arms sliding around his neck as his encircled her waist. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the first night you came to dinner, he confessed. I'm glad you waited, she smiled. It was worth it. They returned to the dance hand in hand, aware of the speculative glances but too wrapped in their newfound understanding to care. When Ryder escorted her home later that night, his goodbye kiss on her porch lasted long enough to set the neighbors' curtains twitching. In the weeks that followed, their courtship became the talk of Pinyon. Ryder made the trip to town nearly every day, sometimes bringing supplies for her clinic, other times simply coming to walk her home after her last patient. Rachel found herself at the Daniels Ranch most Sundays, where Victor watched their growing attachment with barely concealed satisfaction. About time my boy found someone with sense, he told Rachel privately one afternoon while Ryder was out checking the herd. His mother would have liked you. She had that same backbone, that same fire in her eyes. Thank you, Rachel said, touched by the comparison. He speaks of her with such love. She was easy to love, Victor nodded, his eyes distant with memory. Like you. Different as can be on the outside, she was a society girl from Philadelphia, never imagined living rough, but that same heart. Strong, true. He fixed Rachel with a penetrating look. He means to ask you to marry him, you know. Rachel's heart skipped. Has he said so? Doesn't need to, I know my son. Victor leaned forward in his chair. What will you say, doctor, when he asks? It was a direct question, worthy of a direct answer. I love him, she said simply. But my work is important to me. As it should be, Victor nodded. You've got a gift. Wasting it would be a crime. But love's a gift too, one not everyone is fortunate enough to find. The right partner doesn't ask you to be less, they help you become more. His words stayed with her, turning in her mind as autumn deepened toward winter. Snow dusted the mountains by mid-November, and the prairie winds grew sharper. Rachel's practice grew busier as the cold brought the usual winter ailments, and she sometimes went days without seeing Ryder when weather or work kept them apart. Then came the night when pounding on her door roused her from sleep, not an unusual occurrence for a doctor, but the face that greeted her sent ice through her veins. It was Jenkins, Ryder's foreman, his expression grim. "It's Ryder, Doc," he said without preamble. "Bad fall from his horse. He's asking for you." Rachel threw on clothes and grabbed her bag with shaking hands. The ride to the ranch was a nightmare, the wind cutting through her coat as Jenkins pushed the horses to their limit. By the time they arrived, her fear had crystallized into professional focus. Whatever had happened, Ryder needed a doctor now, not a distraught woman. Mrs. Abernathy met her at the door, face pale with worry. "He's in his room, Victor's with him." Rachel took the stairs 2 at a time. The scene in Ryder's bedroom stopped her momentarily. He lay on the bed, unnaturally still, his face ashen beneath his tan. Victor sat beside him, holding his son's hand, looking every one of his 65 years. "Rachel," Ryder's voice was weak but clear. His eyes, glazed with pain, found hers and held. "Told them you'd come." "Of course I came," she said, moving swiftly to his side, setting down her bag and removing her coat. "What happened?" "Damned fool horse spooked at a rattlesnake," Victor answered, reluctantly yielding his place to Rachel. "Threw him against the rocks in the South Canyon. We found him an hour later when his horse came back without him." Rachel was already examining Ryder, her hands gentle but thorough. He winced when she touched his right side. "Broken ribs," she murmured. "At least 2. Her fingers moved to a gash on his temple. "This needs stitches." But it was when she examined his right leg that her concern deepened. The limb was swollen and misshapen midway between knee and ankle. "The leg is broken," she announced, keeping her voice steady though her heart raced with fear. "I need to set it before the swelling worsens." She looked up at Victor. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and whiskey, both for him to drink and to clean the wound. And I need strong hands to help hold him still. This will be painful." Victor nodded grimly and went to make the arrangements. Rachel turned back to Ryder, allowing herself a moment to stroke his hair back from his forehead, a gesture more intimate than professional. "You're going to be all right," she told him, willing it to be true. "But I won't lie to you, setting that leg will hurt worse than breaking it did." A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Good thing. I've got the best doctor in Montana." The next hour was among the worst of Rachel's life. Even with the whiskey dulling his senses, Ryder's scream when she pulled the bone back into alignment tore at her heart. But her hands remained steady, her focus absolute as she splinted the leg and stitched the head wound. When she finally finished, exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She sank into the chair beside his bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest as he slept, sedated by pain and alcohol. "You should rest," Victor said from the doorway. "There's a room prepared for you." Rachel shook her head. "I'll stay with him. The first night after such injuries is critical." Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll send up some coffee, and Rachel, thank you." Left alone with Ryder, Rachel allowed herself to take his hand, her thumb tracing circles on his skin. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely. "Not when I've just found you." Throughout the night, she monitored his breathing and pulse, checking for signs of fever that might indicate infection. Near dawn, he stirred, his eyes opening to find her still beside him. "You're still here," he murmured, echoing the words he'd spoken to her after the night of the rustlers. "Of course," she replied, squeezing his hand. "You told me to stay." His answering smile was weak but real. "Seems only fair, since I'm planning to stay with you forever." Tears blurred her vision. "Is that a proposal, Ryder Daniels?" "Not how I planned it," he admitted, wincing as he shifted position. "Had something more romantic in mind. Ring's in my desk drawer." "You have a ring?" The revelation stunned her. Since the harvest dance, he nodded slightly, was waiting for the right moment. He attempted to sit up, grimacing with pain. "Lie still," she ordered, gently pressing him back against the pillows. "Whatever you have to say can be said lying down." "No," he insisted stubbornly. "Need to do this right." With visible effort, he reached for her hand. "Rachel Rivers, you saved my father's life and now mine. You've brought light and joy and purpose to my days. Will you marry me? Not because you've healed me, but because I love you and want to build a life with you, one where you can continue your important work while knowing you have someone who will always support you, always cherish you, always stand beside you." Rachel felt tears overflow, trailing down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Ryder, I'll marry you." His smile was luminous despite his pain. "The ring can wait," she interrupted, leaning down to kiss him softly. "Just focus on healing now." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Pinyon. To Rachel's surprise, the community's response was overwhelmingly positive. Several of her patients expressed delight that she would be staying permanently, and even those who had initially been skeptical of a female doctor seemed to view her more favorably as future Mrs. Daniels. "As if I needed a husband to validate my medical degree," she remarked dryly to Ryder during his convalescence. "People are complicated," he replied, looking up from the book he was reading. 6 weeks after his accident, he was mobile with the help of crutches, though full recovery of his leg would take months. "They're not just accepting you because of me, Rachel. You've proven yourself a dozen times over, but humans need stories they understand, patterns they recognize." A doctor who's also a wife, a member of a respected family that fits their understanding of the world better than a woman alone. Rachel considered his words, impressed as always by his insight. "When did you get so wise?" "Comes from spending too much time lying in bed thinking," he grinned. "Speaking of which, have you decided on a wedding date yet?" "Spring seems awfully far away." They had provisionally settled on an April wedding, when travel would be easier for Rachel's mother and sister to journey from Boston. But Rachel saw the hope in Ryder's eyes and felt an answering impatience in her own heart. "Perhaps Christmas," she suggested. "My family could still come, and it would give us the winter together before spring brings all its demands." Ryder's face lit up. "Christmas it is," he agreed eagerly. "Though I'm not sure I can wait even that long." As it happened, they didn't have to. 3 weeks later, a blizzard swept across Montana territory, dumping 3 feet of snow in 24 hours. Rachel had gone to the Daniels ranch to check on Ryder's healing leg and found herself stranded when the storm hit. For 3 days, they were snowbound together, along with Victor, Mrs. Abernathy, and the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat before the fire in the main room, Ryder turned to Rachel with sudden determination. "Marry me tomorrow," he said, taking her hands in his. "What?" she laughed, certain he was joking. "Ryder, we can't possibly, why not?" "Judge Parker is staying in the north guest room. He was here discussing water rights with Pa when the storm hit. Mrs. Abernathy can bake a cake. Everyone we care about is here except your family, and we'll have a celebration with them when they visit." Rachel stared at him, realizing he was entirely serious. "But my dress, the preparations, do those things matter more than being my wife?" he asked softly. "More than starting our life together?" Put that way, the answer was simple. "No," she admitted, "they don't." And so, on a snowy December morning, Rachel Rivers married Ryder Daniels in the main room of the ranch house, with Victor giving her away and Judge Parker officiating. She wore a blue dress borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy's trunk and hastily altered, with a sprig of evergreen pinned to her bodice. Ryder stood tall and proud despite his healing leg, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Parker declared, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Daniels." As Ryder's lips met hers, sealing their commitment, Rachel felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. This was not the life she had planned when she journeyed west, but it was infinitely better than anything she could have imagined. Their wedding night was spent in Ryder's room, now their room, with snow still falling softly outside the windows. Despite his injuries, their coming together was tender and passionate, the culmination of months of growing love and desire. "I never thought I could be this happy," Rachel whispered afterward, curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. "It's just the beginning," Ryder promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." Spring arrived late that year, the snow lingering in the mountains well into April. When Rachel's mother and sister finally made the journey west, they found not just a newly married couple but a family already firmly established. "You look different," Elizabeth Rivers told her daughter as they sat on the ranch house porch, watching Ryder work with a young horse in the corral. "There's a piece about you I've never seen before." "I am different," Rachel acknowledged. "I've found a balance I didn't know was possible between my work and my heart. And the people here accept you as a doctor. Even now that you're married," Rachel smiled, thinking of her thriving practice. She divided her time between her clinic in town and the ranch, with patients coming to both locations depending on their needs and her schedule. Far from diminishing her professional standing, her marriage seemed to have enhanced it. "They do," she confirmed. "In fact, Mayor Collins has asked me to establish a proper hospital in Pinyon. The town council has approved funding for a small building to start, with plans to expand as the community grows." "I'm so proud of you," Elizabeth said, taking her daughter's hand. "Your father would be too. You've accomplished everything he dreamed for you and more." Rachel's eyes drifted back to Ryder, who had dismounted and was approaching the porch, his stride showing only a slight unevenness from his healed leg. The sight of him still made her heart quicken, even after months of marriage. "Yes," she agreed softly, "more than I ever dreamed for myself." The Pinyon Hospital opened its doors the following spring, a modest but well-equipped facility with 6 beds and a small surgery. Rachel served as chief physician, with a young doctor from Denver joining her staff as the town continued to grow. Her reputation spread throughout the territory, bringing patients from as far as Helena seeking her expertise. Through it all, Ryder remained her steadfast support, as proud of her accomplishments as she was of his. The Daniels Ranch prospered under his management, and when Victor finally retired to the smaller house built for him near the main residence, Ryder and Rachel assumed full control of the operation. Their first child, a son they named James Victor Daniels, was born on a warm June evening 2 years after their marriage. Rachel had insisted on continuing her work well into her pregnancy, finally conceding to reduce her hours only in the final month. "He's perfect," Ryder whispered, cradling his newborn son with awe, tears unashamedly tracking down his cheeks. "Just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Rachel observed tiredly from the bed. The birth had been long and difficult, but the joy of holding their child made the ordeal fade quickly from memory. "Poor kid," Ryder joked, brushing a finger gently over the baby's downy head. "Let's hope he gets your brains to compensate." Victor, waiting impatiently outside the door, was finally allowed in to meet his grandson. The old man's hands trembled as he took the tiny bundle, his weathered face softening with emotion. "A fine boy," he pronounced, his voice rough with feeling. "A true Daniels." A daughter, Eleanor Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and another son, William Thomas, 2 years after that. Rachel managed to balance motherhood and medicine, though not without challenges. There were nights she returned from difficult cases, too exhausted to do more than kiss her children's sleeping foreheads, and days when she had to choose between a medical emergency and a family celebration. But through it all, Ryder remained her rock, stepping in when she couldn't be in 2 places at once, never once suggesting she set aside her calling. He rearranged ranch business around her schedule when possible, hired additional help when needed, and made sure their children understood the importance of their mother's work. "Your mama saves lives," he would tell them proudly. "There's no work more important than that." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder surprised Rachel with a gift she hadn't expected: the deed to a new building in Pinyon, twice the size of the existing hospital. "The town council approved the expansion last month," he explained as she stared at the papers in shock. "Construction starts in the spring. You'll have space for 15 beds, a proper operating theater, and rooms for medical students if you decide to take on apprentices." "Ryder," she breathed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift. "How did you manage this?" "It wasn't just me," he smiled. "The whole town contributed. You've touched so many lives, Rachel. This is their way of saying thank you." He took her hands in his. "And it's my way of saying I fall more in love with you every day, with your skill, your compassion, your determination to make life better for everyone around you." Rachel looked up at this man who had changed her life in ways she could never have anticipated that night she'd first been called to the Daniels ranch. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of a decade shared, challenges overcome, a family built, and dreams realized. "I know," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "That's the greatest gift of all." As twilight settled over the Montana prairie, casting long shadows across the land that had become her home, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a girl determined to follow her father's footsteps in Boston, to a woman doctor striking out alone in the West, to a wife and mother and respected physician building a medical legacy in Pinyon, each step had led her exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked, joining her on the porch where she stood watching their children play with their grandfather in the yard. "About how sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most perfect destinations," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "About how a desperate ride to save a stranger became the beginning of everything that matters." "Best decision I ever made," Ryder murmured against her hair, "bringing you to help Pa that night, though I had no idea I was riding toward my future." "None of us knows where the trail leads," Rachel smiled, turning in his arms to face him. "We just have to be brave enough to follow it." As the Montana sky darkened and the first stars appeared, they stood together on the porch of the home they'd built, surrounded by the life they'd created, not the life either had imagined, but infinitely more precious for having been discovered together. The lifetime commitment Ryder had offered in gratitude for his father's life had become something far greater: a partnership of equals, a meeting of hearts and minds, a love that had only deepened with each passing season. And in the vastness of the Montana territory, where distance could be measured in days and hardship, was a constant companion, They had found in each other the most precious thing of all, a place to belong, completely and without reservation, for all the days of their lives.